we are around 20 participants. Okay, we won't wait much for the participants to join. We can, I guess we can start at 5. We can keep at least a maximum of 2 more minutes for the participants to join. Meanwhile, I'll ask the participants, those who are not yet joined, to join the session. And Sarita ma'am, we can start exactly at 2:05 p.m. So the session is all yours.
Yeah.
And welcome all. Dr. Sarita will be chairing today's session. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chinchu. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. Welcome to this session of the FDP on gender sensitization and gender equality. This is a topic that is of great concern, especially so during the pandemic situation, because many of the areas that we are having a discussion on over the last 4 days and today also have seen many, situational changes. And I think our speakers will also be talking about some of those as well. This 7-day FDP is being conducted by the Women's Studies Center and the Department of Youth Welfare at Cochin University of Science and Technology. For those of who are not very familiar, I am Dr. Sarita Bhatt. I'm professor and head in the Department of Biotechnology, and I will be joining here with you for this particular session. And we have 3 very eminent speakers for this particular session. Our first speaker will be Advocate Sandhya Raju, who will talk about gender justice. Advocate Sandhya is a human rights lawyer and a human rights activist. She practices in the High Court of Kerala and is associated with the Human Rights Lawyers Network, as well as the Center for Constitutional Rights Research and Advocacy. She has argued a large number of cases of landmark cases related to women's rights and crimes against women. She also speaks and writes on various fora on issues related to human rights and gender. She will be our first speaker today. Mrs. Sandhya, Dr. Sandhya Raju, I invite you to continue with your talk on gender justice. You have been allotted around an hour or so, but I hope that you will take around 40 to 45 minutes for your talk, so that we have at least 10 to 12 minutes for the participants to engage with you in a question answer session. Dr. Sandhya, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really thankful for this privilege to speak to you people. I'm not a doctor, I'm just an advocate. Yeah, I've been working in this area, especially with a special focus on women and children for the past 15 to 20 years now. Gender justice, when we are talking about gender justice, and especially in the legal field, it's a very interesting, I would say, topic. Now, when we are talking about gender justice as such, gender justice would mean that both the male, the feminine, the male gender, female gender, and the transgender all are treated equally, right? Gender justice, when you're talking about justice, which is within the legal framework. Now, law as such is supposed to be very neutral. You're supposed to take things in a very impartial manner, so there is no favoritism given. But we all know invariably there is this mixtures. There is this always the way the way we have been brought up, our cultures, our thoughts, our beliefs, whatever we think and we believe are always peppered in with when we are actually making certain decisions. And when we are talking about gender justice, especially in the recent years, the context has been very sharp, especially when we are talking about issues relating to women and children. And this is where we need to really think. Laws are there, but then laws can actually effectively provide gender justice only if the attitudes of people change. Because you would have heard, you often, like every day you have the reports or newspaper reports of judges making so and so comments, and especially one of the recent ones which actually comes to my mind, and which is there in front, which you would also look at, is about marital rape. Now, you had the judge very openly say, I mean, it's like, we have had two conflicting, two different versions. We have one, our own Kerala High Court judgment, where dignity, where a woman's autonomy on the body is recognized, and marital rape totally rejected. And at the same time, we have another judgment from a different high court, which actually was saying that a woman does not have an autonomy over her body, and very clearly saying that she cannot complain of rape. Now that decision actually uh, has opened floodgates of discussion on whether marital rape should be punished or should not be punished, should we have a law relating to it. And in all these discussions, very clearly, there is this divide as to what is, I mean, just because you're married, does rape not become rape? And for that matter, at we've been discussing, we are constantly talking about it. Unfortunately, the law that is in our IPC, the rape definition very clearly excludes a married couple or a woman from claiming rape. So 376 excludes rape if it's done by the husband. It's not considered rape. Okay. And that is the outcome of that possibly would have been the reason why the High Court judge actually said that it is not rape. There's only, so when we're talking about gender justice, when you're looking at marital rape,
Ma'am, you have muted yourself.
questioning in our mind. Where is justice there for a woman who is married and who is subjected to marital rape? Now, forget that. That's one aspect. You talk about, I mean, there are two things when we are talking about two main areas where law comes into the picture. That is, law comes into the picture of a woman's life, is one within her domestic sphere and one within her her private sphere. And that is where all kinds of all kinds of subjective aspects and attributes come in, which effectively prevent her from getting full gender justice. And when I say that, we just need to look at two main issues which affect women very deeply. One is issues relating to domestic violence and one is issue relating to sexual violence. And both domestic violence and sexual violence are such hotly debated topic. It's been debated for centuries, and still now we still have not really come to a proper conclusion where women can very confidently say that yes, we will get justice. And and that is something which is very sad in a way, and because here we are despite having these laws changed or made, trying to trying to go towards a movement towards justice for women, we find that the attitudes and the gender attitudes which have been prevalent, which have been kind of which are inbuilt or entrenched in a person's mind from the time which they have been which they are brought up, it really affects them. So that is why you have, though you have a provision, though we have though you have provisions for in rape, which says that a woman's character should not be relevant, very often her character is somehow or the other brought out. Yesterday, with this new concept of hearing in like with this new concept right now on account of pandemic, we have court hearings in Zoom. And yesterday I happened to be in court the whole day, and in the whole day in a court which was dealing with cases relating to women and children. And the number of cases where the accused had approached for bail. And what was interesting about all those arguments with respect to getting bail was, all embedded within our patriarchal structure with respect to our attitudes. That was, some of them would have been there's no change in it. I mean, despite we have decisions saying that character is not relevant, or the fact that consent is a very is a very integral part. The entire attitude of the defense lawyer was to put the woman or the victim as a person who was using the law to actually harass him or implicate him, just because for some vague reason, maybe it could have been that she did not get some money from him, or it was a family rivalry. And that is how the narrative is actually encouraged. The kind of arguments which the accused lawyer, and that applies everywhere, whether it be 498A, where whenever a 498A law, you talk about people saying that 498A is being misused, or the Domestic Violence Act is being misused, or the the POSH Act is being misused. Everything is peppered around this fact that women are misusing the law to harass the men involved there, and there is not, and that kind of gets so much of preeminence everywhere, that as a normal narrative, the fact that people start thinking, when a case comes before them, the people start thinking involuntarily that, wait, is this woman making a correct, is she actually talking about it in the correct manner, or is she lying, or is she harassing this person, or did she really suffer this? And this is even more evident when you look at when you see sexual harassment at workplace cases, especially within the internal complaints committee. Because again, you find that though the law very clearly says that you listen to what the victim is saying, somehow or the other, judgmental attitudes suddenly biases start appearing in people's minds, and the kind of thought process which then starts is like, this lady asked for it, and her behavior, her way of interaction with colleagues, all that kind of come in front without actually going through what she actually went through. And that kind of negates that entire objective of um, gender justice, because that is where because that is the entire the entire objective of providing justice to a woman in a very private and confidential manner goes totally out of the window when people who are supposed to be there within the internal complaints committee, who becoming biased, no, only because the person who is there, who was supposed to have been accused of being the accused, allegedly the accused would have been their friend, or would have been who would have used his good offices to kind of uh, trying to tarnish the victim's reputation. And that thing, I mean, that is where, so it is, when you're talking about implementation of law and gender justice, it is this tarnishing of reputation of that victim which psychologically weakens her, and that she gets no confidence in even approaching an internal complaints committee, which was at the first place instituted to give her confidence. So that is one of the most simplest way of simplest or the most basic what do you say area, or simplest area, or something which I would say within the workspace, where women face gender injustice. And it's it is something which is a very sad state, because from when 97 Vishaka judgment was brought in, through Vishaka judgment, when the internal complaints committee concept was brought in, and right to a safe workspace was considered as a fundamental right, was brought in. And eventually 2013 the act came in. There was a major hope that this would actually help women confidently come and work within the workspace. But with the experience which we see of people who have tried to approach the system, approach the internal complaints committee for getting their issues resolved, has been a great disappointment for a lot of people. And many of them are like even wondering, why did I even approach the complaints committee? This is not to kind of say, what I want to say is that I'm not trying to give a negative picture, but this is the reality, and it requires great for a woman to actually get justice. Means you need to kind of understand, and a lot of hand holding needs to go for the woman throughout that entire process, when she initiates that complaint till that process is over, to kind of really support her and take her through that entire process of inquiry. You look at domestic violence. Now domestic violence is also, it's not as if that we didn't have a law which prevented violence against women. It would but 2005 specifically, considering the issue of domestic violence and the nature of domestic violence, uh, 2000 the protection of women from domestic violence was brought in. Now, if you look at the definition of domestic violence, the concept of domestic violence is basically considering our cultural, looking at the cultural attributes of our society, and how women are treated, or how women are subjected to, or the lack of choice women have. It was a very broad definition of domestic violence, which gives agency to women, was brought in. Now we have come to a situation where, when we talk about domestic violence, immediately it is not what the woman has gone through which is an important aspect. It is whether she confirms whether the violence which she is actually claiming is confirming to the popular perception of violence. Only then she is believed. If it does not conform to the popular perception of violence, where if she might say that she wants to go for work, but her family is not allowing her to go for work, that would be considered frivolous. That is, if suppose she files a petition against her father saying that she is forcibly trying to get her married, that is not within the traditional forms of violence, because the father has the right to decide whom she should marry. Now, if she goes for protection orders relating to that, it requires immense support, even from the people, even from the police or the lawyer, who will have to actually think, okay, uh, accept her decision. She needs protection orders. So when you're talking about gender justice, especially with respect to women within these spheres, you're also looking into the traditional attitudes or stereotypes with which we are growing up. Now, we all know that, we all, as lawyers, when we are as law students, while we are studying, very we are taught with this. We are taught this. We automatically, it comes to our mind that when we go to a police station, we file a complaint. Automatically, the case is taken up, and the police will take action. Okay. Now, that is, as for many of you, I don't know, who has approached the police station would know that the reality is very different. The reality is very different, and it is even more difficult for a woman who has to approach the police for filing a case, for maybe, let's say, even just approaching the police station and telling them that my husband beat me, or my family is harassing me, or the husband's family is harassing me. At the very first instance, very often the police may just say, okay, we will see everything, we will call them, and we will try to do something about it. They might not even give you a receipt. Now, if they don't give you a receipt, means that invariably the complaint which you would have actually gone and given to the person in charge would be in the dustbin the next day. Forget that. It could, even if you go for saying something, a complaint relating to cheating, unless you take a receipt, or unless you like unless you take a receipt or you keep a copy of it, invariably it will be in the dustbin. We've had experience where our volunteers have had gone with the domestic violence victim to the police station to file a case, and I'm talking about a lawyer's office, where we have sent these victims with the volunteers to file complaint, and they've been made to sit there for 3 hours in the police station without getting a receipt, waiting, giving some excuse or the other. So that is the level of obstacles one has to face while going through filing a police station, filing a complaint. There are certain, and when we, again, when we talk about sexual violence, especially child sexual violence, again, there is again the standard kind of certain thought processes which are which kind of, you know, are embedded in people's mind. That is like, if a mother says that the daughter has been abused and there is a family court petition which is pending, there is suddenly there is a trigger goes in people's mind that it's a false case because the mother has used the child to kind of allege a false allegation of sexual abuse against the father or grandfather or whoever it may be. And that needle of suspicion kind of, you know, negates any kind of justice which that child should be getting or which that girl should be getting, just because we have these embedded notions of justice in people's mind. So if it's so in a traditional structure, if suppose you are a person who's been beaten up uh, black and blue, and you are even that does not guarantee actually, like if it was because unfortunate to say that, but because let's say Nirbhaya, and for the manner in which her death happened led to the change in 2013 criminal law amendment. But does a person have to go through such kind of brutality? Is when we are talking about gender justice, does a person have to go through such brutality to get people's attention and sympathy, and only then the courts will act? Is something which we really need to look at. Not everyone not everyone who may go through such kind of brutality, but even if that kind of brutality is happening, what happened in Hathras is something we all know. And that is the manner in which, if suppose you belong to a marginalized section of the society, and the abusers are from the powerful sections of the society, even the police are not there for your help for providing justice. We all know what happened in Jisha's case here in Kerala also, where it was only after immense uh, movement by the students and by the people that a case which was almost closed off, which was almost shut, was reinvestigated, and finally an accused named. And I'm saying named because I'm saying an accused name because the kind of evidence, the manner of evidence collection had been very haphazard. So can't really say that. But again, these are the manner, these are those aspects which we need to really think about when we look at gender justice. So I'm talking about all these. I'm talking about what is happening in the courts, what is happening. What actually prevents people from what actually are the obstacles one finds while trying to provide justice for women within the for women or for the gendered community within our conservative framework of laws. And it's not a very easy navigation. um, just because a woman says that I have been beaten up by my husband doesn't mean that automatically she will be given a fair hearing within the court. No, she will be given a hearing in the court, but then there is this thing, her entire behavior or entire attitude is then evaluated within the traditional mindset of how a woman should behave within the family confines. So presently, if you look at it, the gender justice would be very much confined to how the person who is actually supposed to give you supposed to give you justice thinks about women and thinks about a woman's rights. So it's very important that we develop a kind of attitude. We kind of have an have a um, a questioning attitude to the existing structure among both men and women within, I mean, while they are actually studying as students, because only then will we be able to ensure true gender justice. Otherwise, what is going to happen is that the traditional structures which are entrenched from the time you are when we are growing up through the family and through the society, that get entrenched in our mind, and when we are actually involved in these public duties, it is these things which are there in our minds which which come into predominance while we are actually enforcing our laws. And that is what happens when a policeman is sitting there trying to give counseling to a woman who's been beaten up, when it is not his duty. He's supposed to refer the case to a protection officer, but he says that because it is my it's like a family and I want to protect that family, so he will try to, however much that fellow has beaten up, the husband has beaten up the wife, he'll say you try to adjust. The police SHO who is standing, who is waiting there, who is supposed to protect or maintain law and order. Then you may go to the judge, and there the judge also would be trying to, would be in his or her guilt frame, or in his framework would also think about protecting the family, rather than actually thinking why these people have come to court, and whether the woman there is, why has she approach the court for whatever reason it is. Why, rather instead of looking at it within the framework of the entire concept of family as such. So or when we look at sexual violence again, where this girl complains, a 17-year-old girl complains of violence by her boyfriend. Why did she have a boyfriend in the first place, will be the question which would be going on in the mind of the judge. And that is could be going on in the mind of the judge, and that would be maximum utilized by the defense lawyer to kind of deny her the justice which she should be getting. So these are certain questions, these are certain things which are there in our regular in our regular parlance, when we are actually practicing, when we come across, and we try to navigate um, these attitudes, which is a huge task actually, but it is uh, because of certain progressive thinking judges, that very often we get these progressive judgments which give us some kind of hope that we are moving towards gender justice. But what in conclusion I would like to say is that it is very important, as people who are within this field of education, where we are imparting our lessons to the youngsters, to actually make them think about, make them critically question the thought process of our critically question our thoughts and our processes, thoughts which will enable us to effectively provide justice to provide justice, or provide gender justice, I would say. So this is some of my thoughts. Let me know what any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sandhya, Mrs. Sandhya Raju. She spoke about gender justice related related to domestic violence in the domestic sphere, in the professional sphere, in the private spheres, and about social reactions. We have enough time for several questions, so the audience can ask their questions. Mrs. Sandhya, you had mentioned about social reactions to domestic violence or sexual violence. Isn't it a similar situation in Kerala, where we have the actor abduction case, and we have seen nothing much progressing in this particular case, and we have also seen considerable indifference in the or support for the actor from her professional how do you say colleagues as well. So is this something that we seriously need to look at? Because although we are making a lot of progress in other spheres, our how do you say it? We need
I agree with you. I agree.
Considerably in these aspects as well. Please, your take on that.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Right now, actually, the trial is happening. It's an in-camera trial, so no news is coming out. But the thing is, see, here we have a powerful powerful personality within his professional field, lot of money riding on him, and lot of money because invested by him in various projects, and people don't want to go on the wrong way. People don't want to kind of I feel his professional colleagues do not want to rub him the wrong way, maybe that's why. But this is very symptomatic of what we see even within the intern, what would I say, at a smaller level also, because something what the actor abduction case was also something very similar to sexual harassment at workplace. It was a sexual violence which happened to her while she was going to work, while she was returning from work, and it was the duty of the production house to ensure that she returned home safely. Now, this particular, and she the initial kind of sympathy as whatever sympathy, I think everyone gave her the sympathy. But when she decides to actually fight the case, and when a person's name, like an actor's name, comes out, suddenly people have kind of drawn that barrier and chosen their sides. And as long as it was an invisible person who could be an invisible person, it was okay. But because it was a public personality who was involved in this, who was alleged to be involved in this, then people don't want to take the side of the victim, but they would rather take the side of the powerful personality. And that is what we have to be very careful, and we need to work, because this is what happens when we look at internal complaints committee within institutions everywhere. What happened in the Supreme Court also with respect to the sexual harassment issue of the Chief Justice of India, something similar. The entire process was given a go by. So when it involves powerful people, the other people do not want to go against, and that is what we need to develop, that feeling of the structures have to be immune to this fear of powerful people. And how we need to develop, that's a culture which has to come out. Only then can that culture has to develop, because only if that culture develops, that we'll be able to ensure gender justice here. So it is not a smooth journey. It was not a smooth journey even for the actor, nor for that lady who complained against the CJI. So and it is not an easy way for any of the women who complain against any of the powerful person within the within the structure. The incident relating to Priya Ramani, where Priya Ramani's case, where MJ Akbar filed a defamation suit against Priya Ramani, it was I think that is a case of gender justice uh, where the lawyer where the lawyer very nicely navigated that entire patriarchal notions of violence, and what she had undergone and what she had stated was the true fact was brought out in the public, and she stood through with the client till the end. And she had Priya Ramani had her friends also in support of her, but it was a long process where she was also she's a person, a public personality, had friends who were in top positions, who supported her. She had lawyers who could help her, and she navigated that process. Women who would be approaching these systems would need support, like how Priya Ramani had to take any kind of step, and very few women have that support. And that is what, as people advocating gender justice, we need to ensure that we have more people within our fold who will be able to help these people who are approaching the system, and ensure that there is a culture of a culture of ensuring that a powerful personality does not weaken the case, which does not have the power to weaken the case against him. Yeah.
Yes, please. Any other questions?
Hi, ma'am. So my query, or rather a line of thought, is about the out of the court settlement and factors that influence from the police station. Because, for example, taking the example is like, if I want to file an FIR, if somebody has raped me or somebody has leaked my videos or photos in the social media, it's the first thing the policeman would ask is the same thing that ma'am had already told. Why do you have a boyfriend? And if I want to continue with the case, the policeman would tell me that it's like, this is your age. So the time that you grew up, a lot of media would celebrate it. They will, show these pictures, and so you cannot control this in the social media. You don't know to what extent all of these would go. And the more you go for it, the more you will be vulnerable. And they will also say these people are, be it a powerful person or not a powerful person, their thing is that why don't you try to settle it in the out of the court? And it's like, the justice comes in a way like monetary terms. So that's their definition of justice for me as a woman. So another thing is like, do you think that later a person would come and marry you, or this will really help you in your future? So a lot of these questions. So what the police station is really trying to do, despite the fact that, okay, there are people, the law says that there should be a lady police officer, or there should be a person whom I feel comfortable about when I talk. Despite all of these factors, it's like, I don't know how many policemen has really helped a woman to come and file FIRs and then go forward with their cases. Maybe they will tell you this would take nearly 10-12 years. They will cite you. It's like,
I agree with you totally, because this is something we face on a regular day-to-day basis, and it's a struggle to get, like I told you, a struggle to get an FIR registered itself, especially when you're talking about issues relating to women and children. And sexual violence is the thing is, the fact that women get intimidated by courts and by people kind of tarnishing our reputation, or people trying to stigmatizing our reputation, that we ourselves kind of restrain ourselves. We ourselves will not go to a police station. There are a lot of women who come to us, say, madam, this is the first time I went to a police station. I've never been to a police station. We are not like that, and things like that, as if police station is a place where only people who really have lot of troubles go. But the thing is, and a police station is supposed to be an open space where anyone can go file a complaint, because they are supposed to maintain the law and order. But when you don't take issues relating to women seriously, these kind of things happen, and it's like, it's an easy way out. So it's a big struggle for everyone, because it kind of what the police is there. Not everyone does that, but what the police there is trying to do is basically trying to add on to your fears and trying to restrain you. But that's a very dangerous thing, because what happens is the person who commits the crime, he's let off easily. The fact that he feels that by giving money he can easily come out, or by marrying he can easily come out of it. And this marriage concept is what is actually makes a lot of people settle also, because I feel again they feel that especially in issues relating to sexual violence, the primary thing in everyone's mind is like, then who will marry me? Or now I've become I have been soiled, so now no one is going, I will not get a good alliance and things like that. This entire premium placed on marriage is actually which forces a lot of women to kind of settle. And I think it's a very dangerous proposition, and we have to get away from that proposition, because marriage does not really help any kind of stability in these kind of things. It actually adds up to the low self-esteem of women, and it's a big blow to gender justice. So I really do not support it. And actually the Supreme Court, through several decisions recently, have actually not allowed settlement of cases like this, because we have in the High Court, and it was a habit, it was a practice actually, that you settle cases by saying that this fellow will say, I'm ready to marry her, and then she will also be okay, or the family will be okay, and then they would get married. So this entire concept again on a woman's chastity and a woman's conduct, I mean, that is given a lot of premium. And that is why when sexual violence happens, the woman feels that everything has been lost for her. So that is cashed on by people like these police people, or people who will kind of try to settle the matter, because no one wants to go to jail, so they will say anything to get out of jail at that time. So
But ma'am, my
yeah.
question is about how to get away from this proposition, because I cannot give complaints again against the police officer.
You
How
don't
many
have
times
to.
should I give the
No, if suppose something has happened to you, and if that police person is not taking that complaint, you just need to go to the higher official and file the complaint there. That's all, plain and simple. You just need to go to the superior officer and say, I went there, but this is what is happening, so I'm giving the complaint here, and I have no interest in settling the matter. Plain and simple. That's all. There is no other mixture or masala anywhere involved. You don't have to feel if the police are not taking a complaint, then we can file a private complaint. The law is very clear on that. You just
Okay,
need to go to the senior official and file a complaint. That's all. You
Okay,
don't
there is
need you don't need to encourage the police to talk these kind of things.
Okay, there is a question in the chat box which says that my query is not related to what Advocate Sandhya has talked about. My concern is how the chair has called or addressed Advocate Sandhya. She has used the prefix Mrs. How do you people see that prefix? I would like to clarify here that I also called Advocate Sandhya, Dr. Sandhya also. And I may have used Mrs. We also use Shrimati or Kumari. Again, this is like somebody would say, this is a cultural coloring that we have when we address somebody as Shrimati, and English translation of that is normally used as Mrs. So if anybody is offended here, I would like to apologize for that, but I have also conferred an honorary doctorate on Miss Sandhya as well. So we can move on to the next question if there are any.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
sure.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an insightful conversation. I just wanted to know, like, when we look at the institutions that have been brought in, like such as ICC, and also women-friendly initiatives at the police station, like wherein you have the WCPOs going to the panchayats every week. They are supposed to go once a day every week, so that women, especially who do not want to come to the police station, can come into a relatively more friendly environment and then maybe register a complaint or talk when they have an issue. So, but when we look at all these initiatives, it is seen that it is not effective enough. So what needs to be done, like especially when you come to ICC in the private sector, the intervention of the state into the private sector is very limited. It's mostly related to the labor inspections and all that, wherein this ICC does not come into the purview. So how to make these effective? There are initiatives, but not effective enough. So how to make them effective?
You know, I agree with you. I am also invited to be part of many of the ICCs within the corporates as external members. So, and when some of them invite me, they say, you know, we don't have many of these cases coming in, but, you know, we have to do it as a standard statutory process. So we are setting up this. One good thing, what I feel about the statute, because it is mandatory and because of many of these ISO clearances which they require for they need to set up a committee. I feel just first having a committee itself is one step ahead. We will need to do a lot of I think a lot sensitization, I feel, is a misused word, but again, that needs to be done. The government needs to very clearly have this no tolerance policy, and ensuring that reports are called for regularly, and ensure that meetings are find out whether meetings are held, because these are all part of the industrial standing orders, especially with respect to private companies, and also with respect to government establishments and educational institutions. The district LCC should actually ensure that the reports are called for, and make these constant monitoring, regular monitoring, I feel, which will ensure that some action does take place. Otherwise, I feel it will be just a dead letter. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Advocate Sandhya? You can see that I am treading very carefully here.
Yeah, it's time, I think.
Yeah. So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank Advocate Sandhya for a very clear picture for her talk on various aspects of violence and issues related to it. And she has simplified this so that even a person like me, who comes with only a scientific background, understands the nitty-gritties of these issues. I would like to thank her on behalf of the women's study, as well as the we have two people who are actually doing this program together, the Women's Study Center and the Department of Youth Welfare. On behalf of both of these departments in the university, I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk. And this allows our next speaker also to attach a continuity to the topic that has been selected for this FDP. Thank you very much, madam. Dr. Chinchu, would you like to add something here?
No, ma'am. We'll call Dr. Shalini for her session. Thank you, Advocate Sandhya.
Thank you.